Good morning to everybody. Welcome to the official start of the spring 2022 semester and to the University Retreat. My name is Dr. Teddy Albanak. I'm chair of the Academic Senate, and I'm honored to guide us all through this morning's session. First, let me welcome my friend and colleague, Dr. Wei-Ming Dariotis, Professor of Asian American Studies and the Faculty Director of the Center for Equity and Excellence in Teaching and Learning.
Good morning, Senate Chair Albanak, and thank you for inviting me to provide today's land acknowledgement. I'm not an Indigenous person, and I can only speak from my perspective and experiences, which I shall do in providing today's land acknowledgement. As part of this, I will begin by acknowledging the impact of the recent volcanic eruption on Tonga. The loss of life has been limited. The impact is catastrophic and will certainly have long-term effects for the island, its people, and their neighbors, and for the large Tongan and other Pacific Islander communities of the Bay Area, many of whom are members of our SF state community. I am Dr. Wei-Ming Dariotis, and as a woman of color, I know that I'm an aspirational role model for other women and feminine identified people, especially BIPOC folks. And thus I claim my earned title so that others might be inspired to one day do the same. I use the pronouns she, her, and the spoken Mandarin gender neutral ta as a way to proclaim my gender identity and also claim some of my mixed heritage as a Shanghainese, Greek, Swedish American person. I'm a full professor of Asian American Studies, affiliate faculty with the Educational Leadership Doctoral Program, and faculty director of the Center for Equity and Excellence in Teaching and Learning. About a year ago, President Mahoney asked me to talk with her about land acknowledgements because she had heard about the module we have in the Jedi Pi Institute exploring this topic. She wanted to reframe the US history class she was teaching from a San Francisco-centric perspective instead of the East Coast European immigration narrative that dominates US history instruction. I've seen many other faculty and disciplines ranging from computer science, engineering, music, nursing, management, and others becoming more curious about how they can meaningfully incorporate land acknowledgements into their teaching as part of supporting belonging and inclusion in their classes, and as part of their personal commitment to decolonizing their disciplines. Some faculty have shared with me their excitement that students have begun incorporating their own land acknowledgements into their presentations, essays, and other work, somewhat spontaneously, both to pay homage to the Indigenous people and traditional caretakers of the land, and also to deepen the meaning and purpose of their work. It is hard to come to terms with the knowledge that we live and work in a post-genocidal landscape. This weekend, I met someone who had immigrated to the United States as an adult from India and only had knowledge of East Coast indigenous peoples. She was shocked when I told her that San Francisco, known as Yalamu by the Ramaytush Ohlone people, who are the original inhabitants, was once home to 1,500 individuals, but only one of them, known to us as Leandra, survived colonization by Spain and the US. All 4 family lineages of Ramaytush Ohlone people descend from that sole survivor, and only about 200 words of their language remain. Other Bay Area Ohlone peoples, the Coast Miwok and Southern Pomo peoples, who are a sovereign nation named the Federated Indians of Grattan Rancheria, and other regional indigenous nations have different specific histories, languages, and traditions. My new friend told me that she had not realized and was horrified to learn that the entire United States had been occupied by indigenous nations before colonialism. And that is part of the point of doing a land acknowledgement. If it only serves the purpose of communicating that the Ramaytush Ohlone people have lived in this region for between 10 to 15,000 years, and that they deeply shaped the flora and fauna of this area through their stewardship, then that is an important accomplishment. But a land acknowledgement is also a place in which we can establish a deeper sense of context and purpose by choosing how we will honor the request of the Ramaytush Ohlone Peoples Association that we share in their responsibility as stewards of this land and caretakers of all the people who live here. Further, a land acknowledgement is a ritual through which we can communicate our awareness and appreciation of the people who have shaped the places we live and work, and also of the people who have shaped us, our ancestors, our families, our friends, and our teachers. It gives us an opportunity to name those aspects of our identities that impact our relationships with others through hierarchies of power. For example, I identify as a mixed race, Chinese, Greek, Swedish, cisgender, bisexual, queer woman, married to a Black Muslim cis-het man and mother of an adopted Black cisgendered female child. I'm currently middle-aged, 52, and middle class, living with an ongoing painful injury. I'm well-fed, but not always well-rested. I share with you aspects of my identity that include my privilege and power, and also aspects that might make me vulnerable in some spaces. By doing this, I hope to encourage all of us to make SF State a space in which it is safer for all of us to be vulnerable with one another, so that we can let go of fear of judgment, which is one of the biggest barriers to learning. Finally, a land acknowledgement is a ritual through which we can deeply commit our intentions in each specific context, in our classes, in our meetings, and even in our celebrations. My intention today is to help provide a space through which our whole community of educators, teachers, and learners, our staff, administrators, faculty, and students can come together in this inaugural all-university retreat to share the many ways we are already supporting student success, get ideas from each other to deepen or improve this support, and to discover how we might move forward together to better achieve our university's mission of social justice through education. Senate Chair Albanak, back to you.
Thank you so much, Wei Ming, for that important historical reflection and current recognition. I know that we all wish the start of the semester would feel a bit different than this one does. I've heard from so many people about various feelings: anxiety, fear, anger, optimism, and yes, still even some occasional joy. And I cycle through each on an almost daily basis. But whatever you're feeling now or in the various rhythms of your day, let me first thank you for a few things. First, for the work you've already done and will do, but also especially for joining us today. One of the best remedies for all of the affects that continued and extended pandemic has stirred up is to sit in community with others and to remember that we are in fact connected through space and screen based on our shared belief in the transformative value of public and accessible higher education. So thank you to all the faculty, tenure track and lecturers, administrators, and for the first time at this event, staff and students for collectively joining together to make this an inaugural university retreat. It's why this year's theme, Resounding Resilience, faculty and staff support student success, could not be more indispensable as the organizing principle for our collective work. It's that certain grit and toughness in the face of adversity that allows us to reshape and refashion our conditions that ought to resound and reverberate. And as we move through today's addresses, panels, discussions, and future commitments, I think we'll also come to find such empathetic commitments to our students, to ourselves, and to each other is a continual and core element to any way we can think about maintaining and enhancing success. The University Retreat represents a unique collaboration among 4 pillars of activity that shape the university experience: research, teaching, service, and organization. So thank you to the University Retreat Planning Committee for putting together today's event. Wei Ming Dariotis, Professor of Asian American Studies and Faculty Director of the Center for Equity and Excellence in Teaching and Learning. Kate Hamill, Professor in the Department of Kinesiology and University Research, Scholarship, and Creative Arts Council Representative. Jackson Wilson, Professor in the Department of Recreation, Parks, and Tourism, and Vice Chair of the Academic Senate. Christian Alvarado, LMS Administrator and Academic Technologies. Lisa Cow and Lori Majoulay for captioning the event. And to Brian Newman, Communication and Outreach Specialist for CEETL. It is with an elated and heavy heart that I want to give a special shout out to Brian today. It's his last day with San Francisco State. And we all wish the best of luck to you as you move on to your new role at UCSF. And we thank you for your work on this event and indeed to the university during your time here. As we've learned, resilience, as with student success, is not a one-off event. It requires attention, discussion, honesty, and reorientation. It involves courage and reflection, openness and reflexivity. And most of all, it requires commitment. For me, it's a reminder that we need to both think in broad scales and small interventions because both truly matter and are very needed in order to ensure the point of our collective activity, the successes, joy, and accomplishment of the students that come through our campus as it reverberates. So to initiate this call this morning, please join me in welcoming President Lynn Mahoney.
Thank you, Chair Albenak. First and foremost, I echo the gratitude. It is a real pleasure to see so many people here under the circumstances. The semester in no way, shape, or form started the way that and I think many of us anticipated. So it is just such a pleasure to see, I think, almost 300 people here. I am deeply appreciative that as a university, while we continue to navigate almost the unimaginable and seemingly unending vicissitudes of the pandemic, we have kept our focus on what matters most, and that's the success of our students. Almost 20 years ago, while a faculty member at the State University of New York, I began working with the American Association of State Colleges and Universities on a series of projects related to student success, studying in particular why some universities, not my own at that time, succeeded better than others in serving students who were the first in their families to attend college, students who came from under-resourced schools, and students from BIPOC communities. I learned two critical things from my work with ASCU. Leadership and institutional culture matter, and that's why today is so important, and that the best student success work in the country was happening in the California State University. In the more than 13 years I have now spent in the CSU, I have never been disappointed. We made ambitious commitments as a system and individual campuses to our students and their families and communities in 2009, and again in 2016, and again now, setting graduation rate goals that many thought impossible, but we succeeded. And as a result, the CSU has produced tens of thousands additional degree-bearing alumni in the last decade or so. And we continue to make consistent progress on goals like the 4-year graduation rate for freshmen, while simply blowing past goals like those we set for transfer students. At San Francisco State, we embraced student success and shared in the creation of these well-qualified alumni. We made important improvements in advising and tutoring, improved access to needed classes, created critically needed infrastructure to support inclusive excellence and equity and excellence in teaching, and provided better support for basic needs in students in financial crisis, among many other improvements. And we should be very proud of our work and our gains in student retention and graduation. But we have much more to do. Recent data shows that too many of our students continue to walk away without degrees, particularly Black and Latinx students. Only 67% of the Black and Latinx freshmen who started here in the fall of 2019 remained enrolled by fall 2021. That's 574 students who are no longer here making progress to their degrees. And research repeatedly shows that those who walk away do not return. I should note that actually our retention increased during the pandemic. So prior to the fall of 19 class, the number of students who walked away would have even been larger. Studies also show that students who earn 30 credits a year are far more likely to graduate from college than those who earn less than 60 in their first 2 years. But at San Francisco State, freshmen who started in the fall of 19 earned an average of only 51 units over their first 2 years, woefully short of the 60 that studies repeatedly show leads to success, and lower than most freshmen in the CSU. I believe we're something like 19th out of 23. Given the cost of attendance, especially including Bay Area housing costs, our students have an even greater need to earn more units their first 2 years and graduate in a timely fashion. Chancellor Castro has set an ambitious goal of eliminating equity gaps across the CSU. And you'll see in the most recent budget that it's a goal that the governor supports. At San Francisco State, we don't need to be prodded to do this. Our historic commitment to social justice and educational equity requires us to work tirelessly to eliminate inequities. Closing our equity gaps is the right thing to do for our students, their families, our region, and the state. It is also in the best interest of the health of our institution. Improving the student experience will enable us to retain more students and will attract more students to study at San Francisco State, helping us increase our enrollment numbers. Strengthening our enrollment numbers will provide us with a more solid financial foundation upon which to hire staff and faculty to support our students and to support one another. Close to half of our students identify as Black, Latinx, Pacific Islander, or Native American. Helping them attain their degree goals in far greater numbers helps us all. Building on the work already underway across the university's colleges, divisions, and offices, and the work of groups like the Student Success and Graduation Initiative Committee, we have created an action plan to meet the objectives outlined by Chancellor Castro. Over the coming weeks, you'll hear more about this plan and the work required to meet the goal of eliminating our equity gaps. There is no university better poised to do this than San Francisco State. Working with unrelenting focus and together across our traditional divides, we can do this. And despite the challenges of the pandemic, this is the right moment to embrace this work. BIPOC communities continue to wrestle with the short and long-term consequences of COVID-19. The impact on education for BIPOC communities is only beginning to be understood. Our enrollments and budgets remain volatile. By providing access to high-quality degrees and by meeting the promise of degree attainment, we will build a more just future and a stronger university. Again, I want to conclude by echoing Teddy's tremendous thanks. It's been an unimaginably hard 2 years, and in some ways it just seems to keep getting harder. But the fact that so many of you have taken the time to be here together this morning as a community and as a university in support of our students brings me great joy among a lot of stress and havoc. So again, thank you for your attendance here. This retreat and all of you leave me with great confidence. Thank you, Teddy.
Thank you so much, President Mahoney, for your leadership during this time and also for these particular words and commitments. I'd like to now turn to our panel discussion for today that will pair some of the goals expressed by the President with exploration of the work being done across campus to help elucidate and inspire some thinking around the complex term student success. So join me in welcoming all 5 of our panelists: Lori Beth Way, Student Success and Graduation Initiative 2025 Committee Co-Chair and the Dean of Undergraduate Education and Academic Planning; Savi Malik, the Director of Curriculum and Faculty Development at Metro College Success Program in the College of Ethnic Studies; Grace Yu, the Faculty Director of the First Year Experience, Professor of Asian American Studies in the College of Ethnic Studies; Leticia Marquez Magana, Director of Health Equity Research Lab and SF Build, and Professor of Biology in the College of Science and Engineering; and Robert Bonner, Anti-Racism Task Force Representative and Assistant Professor of Management in the Lamb Family College of Business. Welcome, Dr. Way.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. It is so great to see how many people in our university community are here. As I was writing my remarks last night, I was pulled into the needs of my little ones, as many of us are as we work from home. I told them that I was sorry that I had to keep working, but I was writing a talk for about 300 people. My 5-year-old, one of the most brilliant people I've ever met, said, "But Mama, how can 300 people get in your computer?" This is our life at a time when we have so much pulling us in so many directions and maybe even pulling us down. I appreciate you taking the time to be with us as we think about how best to serve our students. I've been asked to facilitate a panel of amazing people who I admire. I'm not sure how I got so lucky to serve in this capacity, but I'll take it. We held a preparation meeting last week, and I can't tell you how much they lifted my spirits and renewed my faith in the idea that regardless of the challenges we may face, my colleagues' love for this institution, our students, and each other will overcome. They inspire me to look hard at where we are, recognize we're doing well, where we're doing well, and have the courage to collectively do better especially by our BIPOC students. As you heard from President Mahoney, the CSU launched its graduation initiative 2020-25 in 2016. I've been asked today to give some remarks about our campus efforts to meet that initiative and give some details about the CSU equity priorities that we're focusing on now. I want to provide enough information so that we all have adequate context, but also be as brief as possible so we can hear more from our colleagues about how they are working towards student success and closing equity gaps. When the graduation initiative was announced, the CSU asked each campus to write their own plans to increase graduation rates and reduce equity gaps. Honestly, it can sometimes be hard and maybe a challenge to be in a system. We can't always do whatever we want. We have to be guided, maybe sometimes controlled, by the directives and priorities of the system-wide office. While that is true, I can also honestly say that I was immensely proud of our system when they announced that part of the goals of the GI 2025 initiative would be a 0% equity gap and a 0% Pell Gap in graduation rates. That was the right public commitment to make and one we should ethically fulfill. I generally can't stress enough that when we talk about student success, what we're really talking about is figuring out the ways in which our institution can meet the needs of all of our students, especially our historically underserved students. Student success always means eliminating equity gaps. So our provost, who was at the time in my position, collaborated with SEM leadership to write our campus plan. It included 6 pillars. Sorry, one second, got big on my screen. Okay, it included 6 pillars. The first deals with historical problem we faced at SF State, course availability, offering the classes our students need. Additionally, in terms of thoughtful curricular design, we've encouraged programs to think about how their majors best serve students. To that end, we funded 30 departments by a TECL Foundation grant to redesign their curricula. Additionally, we funded 20 programs to make curricular changes and innovations like the climate change certificate with student success in the majors grants. Our campus has responded in creative and student-centered ways to these opportunities. The second pillar is about coordinated strategic advising. We've made and continue to make improvements in the area of advising. This includes now assigning all first-year students their own advisor and increasing training for faculty advisors. We've also made great strides in sharing data related to our graduation and retention efforts, which then have informed additional interventions. Over the academic year 2016-2017, approximately 100 staff and faculty collaborated via our Foundations of Excellence project to examine how to better support our first-year students. And we've made incredible strides to implement the recommendations made by those groups. We also knew that not all of our students were being equally well served by our institution. Hence, one of our pillars was to target our support services. The Division of Equity and Community Inclusion is an essential portion of this part of our plan. Finally, we recognized that we needed to direct our hiring efforts in the areas of enrollment growth and to support our faculty with high quality professional development. CEETL has way surpassed any expectations in this regard. Pre-pandemic, the strides they made were fantastic. The support they've given the faculty during the pandemic is beyond exemplary. So you can see we've done a lot. There's so much here to be proud of. We're making progress, of that there's no doubt, but we also have to face some sobering outcome measures. Thanks. There's a lot on this slide and we'll have it posted to the iLearn site, but what I want to most focus on here is our equity gaps. As President Mahoney emphasized, as an institution with our mission, this can't be acceptable. Yes, we've done a lot, but at the same time, we need to be brave enough to say that we can do more and we will. We need to evaluate what we can, perhaps, do differently. And so it is well timed that the system has stepped in. It is not just SF State that is struggling with reducing equity gaps as quickly as we would like. This is a problem at many of the CSU campuses. The Chancellor's Office at the end of November issued these 5 equity priorities that all 23 campuses were to immediately focus on. These are the practices that they have seen have been making a difference. The first priority is to reach out to our students who have started at SF State, but then have left. We have already had excellent success doing this in the last few months. We initially brought back 60 students who started with us in fall 2019, but were not with us in spring 2021. And an additional 240 students who were with us in spring 2021, but not this past fall 2021. Sometimes students need to take a semester off, but we've learned that they also need us to encourage and assist them to come back. And this is already working. Related to equity priority 2, research shows, as the president mentioned, that CSU BIPOC students are less likely to earn 30 units in their first year, and yet doing so increases their retention. We know that 15 units in a given semester might be a lot for a student who has to work. So the goal here is to help them also use summer and winter sessions to ultimately achieve 30 units a year. Related to equity priority 3, I wish I could say we had enough money to provide all the advising support that students need, but we don't. There are tools that assist students in planning their courses, and the CSU is rightfully emphasizing that we should be using those for all our students. Related to equity priority 4. I hope we're not the DMV, but maybe we are. We can't keep giving the students the runaround. My colleague, Dr. Grace Yu, who is a member of our panel, calls this the SF State infinity loop. We have to make the university easier for students to navigate. As I read in a piece recently, the most difficult thing for students should be their coursework, not the mazes we put them through. We'll fix this. I'm confident we will. Finally, the CSU has asked us to focus on courses with high failure rates that also impact a large number of students. The campus has made progress on this, and CEETL will be engaging departments on this with these classes over this semester. So what's next? I'm pleased that today's retreat is a university retreat. I recognize that we're all in this together and will only be successful if we address equity gaps collectively. Here are some ways you can help. We know students want to come back when they leave first semester. Our research also shows that if we don't get them back after a 1 semester stop out, we're unlikely to do so, and then they never graduate from any institution. This work matters. As we organize efforts to reach out to these students, this is a place that you can really make a difference, and students are telling us they so appreciate it. Second, for departments, please think about what classes your students really need to increase credit accumulation in the summer. Third, if we're going to be able to have technology assist our students with advising tools, we need accurate information. Please, chairs especially, annually review the roadmaps in the bulletin. We want to make sure we're reflecting what you want us to advise your students. Fourth, if we want to assist transfer students in completing in a timely fashion, we need to maximize their community college credits. Please consider increasing the courses you're willing to articulate with community colleges. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, show our students you care. Reach out to them if they're not attending the classes. As staff members, be willing to assist them or do a warm handoff rather than sending them into the infinity loop. I know our panel will speak to this more eloquently than I can, so I'm just raising this here. There is hope, my friends. As the president mentioned, even in a pandemic, we've been able to slightly raise retention rates. Other campuses are seeing sinking retention rates, so this is truly a big win. I think it shows what we can do. I wouldn't be standing before you today if I didn't believe in us, both individually and collectively. I know San Francisco State can do this. There's nowhere else in the world I would choose to be than standing with you shoulder to shoulder as we face our challenges and say, yeah, there's the housing issues. Yeah, there's the pandemic. Honestly, there's always going to be something, but we can do this. In that, I believe. I know that more than ever, when I speak to the colleagues we turn to now, I want to thank them for being here and ask them to tell us about their story as it relates to student success and to introduce themselves as they do so. Dr. Malik, if you could go first.
Thank you so much, Lori Beth. Really appreciate it. And it's so nice to see all of you here today. My name is Savi Malik. I'm the Director of Curriculum and Faculty Development for the Metro College Success Program. And I'm really excited to be with you today to talk more about equity and student success and what we can do collectively to shift it.
Bob?
Oh, hello, I'm Bob Bonner, and I am an assistant professor of management. And sorry, one second. Can we move past these? Sorry.
Letty, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us your story as it relates to student success?
I'm Letty Marquez Magaña, Chiea, and I'm a professor in biology. I've been at State for 27 years, and I've seen an evolution of understanding and what we can better do to address equity gaps, but we have a very long way to go, in my opinion. And so I think we've got the awareness. Maybe we haven't accepted what we've learned, but we'll get there. And now it's important to take action, whether we accept that there are systemic barriers or not. We need to overcome this for all of our benefit.
Thank you, Grace.
Great. Well, Lori Beth, I thought I was going to share my photo of what I was like as a college student, but I don't think our other panelists are, but I want to make mention. My name is Grace Hugh. I'm a professor of Asian American Studies and first year experience faculty director. I've been at San Francisco State for the last 26 years. I maybe just want to just briefly state that I was an undergraduate at UCI. It was really hard, really difficult. And I had my parents' dreams on my backs. And I got through UCI because I encountered a faculty and staff member that cared. And so I think this is what our panel is all about today, is really talking about our own experiences and how we got through our own collegiate experience. Anyways, I'm happy to share and talk as you ask us further questions, Lori Beth.
Great, thanks. Bob, do you want me to go back?
I'm back. Yes, I am back. As I said, I'm assistant professor of management, and I've been at SFSU for going on my 4th year. And then, I'm interested and excited to speak with the panel and others about how we play an integral role in the success of our students. And so, coming from a student who was not as successful my first couple of years in college, it was faculty and advisors and staff that really helped me kind of get on track. And so I'm really grateful for that. And I try to pay it forward by also thinking about my students within that lens as well.
And Savi, I know you introduced yourself, but do you want to say a little bit about your story with student success?
Sure. So like Grace, I had an undergraduate experience at UC Berkeley and got 2 degrees at San Francisco State, both my master's and my doctorate at SF State. And I've been at SF State, I was counting, since 2003 as a graduate student, so almost 20 years now. And yeah, I feel like there's a lot to say, I think, about personal identity and our stories and how they shape who we are and what we do at San Francisco State. And I'll say a little bit more about my own personal background. I grew up culturally Indian and Hindu, and I am raising mixed race children in the current conditions that we're living in. My kids are Mexican and Indian. And the questions of race and equity came up very early on for me, growing up in a pretty homogenous community, being one of the only Indian kids, my sister being the other in my school, and recognizing what that means for students coming into spaces where we are not historically seen, we're not historically acknowledged for the work that we do and the kind of contributions that we bring to our communities. I wanted to talk a little bit too, just about what me being in San Francisco has really meant, and why San Francisco State means so much, and why the work we all do collectively is so important. Our young people are facing some incredible challenges right now. And my own upbringing, my own relationship with race and class have absolutely impacted my ability to attain the degrees that I attained. And I'll say a little bit more about my my academic story a little bit later as we go on. But just to say that this work is all of our work, and it's urgent. This work can't wait. The 2025 graduation initiative, 2025 is tomorrow. So we have a lot that we have to work on, and we can do this collectively. I'll stop there and we can continue to talk as you ask questions, Lori Beth. Thank you.
Great. So Grace, I'm going to start with you on the next question, just as a heads up.
Sure.
And this was a great transition from Savi. How can we all work together to better understand our students and to really see them? What is a good student?
That's such a great question. I think as faculty or staff, we often are focused on the task or content at hand, and we often forget what were we like at this age, at the age of 18 or 19, which is the majority of our students who are at that age, 18, 19, 20, 22. What were we like? And so I often, in my work with first year experience, I often pose that question to all of the faculty and staff that I work with, is if they can remember, if they can think back 35 years ago, 50 years ago, what were you like? And if you can think about that, in fact, put it in the chat, what were you like as a first year student, wherever you were at? We can remember that. We can be so much more compassionate, and we could see our students so much better. In fact, also, as students enter SF State, there's so many transitions, and you can even think about your own transitions when you went on to college. And the majority of our students are emerging adults. in between that space of adolescence and young adulthood, they're still growing. And many of them are working on their own development of trying to find their own purpose in this world. Also, many of our students are first generation students, often the first to go to college. Our students are diverse. The majority of our campus is non-white, and many of our students come from immigrant families. I think if we, Yoso's framework of community cultural wealth, of really just seeing just the gifts of our students, that they are enough. I think that's the other thing, is that often there's a tendency not to think that our students are not enough, but our students are enough and we're enough. And so to celebrate that, I think that's how we can see our students. And I think in terms of good students, I wouldn't even use the word good students. I would say our students are enough.
That's right. Perfect. And I just thank you for the invitation to folks to chat, but they can't actually chat in the webinar function. So hopefully everyone though can imagine yourself as a college student as Grace has invited you to. Bob, if you want to address this question next.
Yeah, so I kind of want to change it a little bit in terms of when we think back to what we were like as college students. Many of us, by pursuing higher education, many of us were really, although we had our own idiosyncrasies when we were, depending on the age, we do have this tendency to be like really good students and really have this sort of affinity towards higher education. And so one thing that I have to do, or one thing that I do, is I really make sure that I try to really understand the students. So, and moving to Qualtrics, it's allowed me, my initial intake of student inventory allows me to kind of get a better sense of who my students are. And so, for example, recently I've been looking at the number of students in my classes that actually work. So we look at a lot of our descriptives of, are they URM, are they first gen, Pell Grant, things like that. Well, I'm finding that typically only 10 to 20% of my students don't work or don't plan to work, which means that a majority of my students are currently working. And so if I design a curriculum that's based off of what I would perceive as a typical student, which is a full-time student, then I'm inherently creating a curriculum and designing a course that is made for the 10 to 20% of students. And even those 10 to 20% students in my classes are typically international students, who are going through their own sorts of difficulties. So just being very mindful that it's not even just the descriptive nature of our students, but each of them are going through things. I ask them questions about what might be barriers to them in the semester, and I get a whole bunch of answers about extra caretaking duties that they've taken on and things like that. So like really taking the time to understand our students, I think, is something that we ought to do, and then the rest will follow based off of that, in my thoughts.
Thank you, Bob. Letty?
So just reflecting on the two previous speakers, what kind of student was I? I say I was an ABC student. I got A's in the liberal studies, the general education courses. I got B's in biology and I got C's in chemistry. So I was a fabulous student. I really cared about the content. I really worked hard. I tried my best to get into research labs. That didn't work, so I found other research opportunities off campus. So I remind myself about a lot of our students who hit barriers and then overcome them. And so when I think about how to better see our students, is I think, as the previous speakers have said, is to really reflect on our experiences so that we can better have empathy and compassion for our own students. And, I've talked to colleagues, and I think the thing that is very clear is that many of us have come from these prestigious institutions, right? So my own pedigree is Stanford and Berkeley, yet I always say that San Francisco State is my heart and my home. Nonetheless, with that, even though I'm a woman of color and short and brown and don't fit the stereotype of a successful person, having the Stanford and Berkeley key opened a lot of doors. Then I come to State and it's like, whoa, okay. So I think many of us have that feeling of being of lower prestige, and how that is something that is not merited. We are amazing. And I think that our students in many of our classes have that lower prestige. They're stereotyped as being unsuccessful. They're not unable to be successful. So I think if faculty can reflect on what it feels like to be stereotyped as being less than in these environments where we know we're more than and what's missing, maybe we can then see our students is more than and what's missing in our society.
Thank you, Letty. Savi?
Yeah, I don't think I could have said it better. Our students are enough, as Grace is saying, like they're enough. I will just share a little bit about my own experience as a student. I started off as a chemical engineering major at UC Berkeley and ended up on academic probation at the end of my first year. I couldn't pass calculus. I didn't know what I was doing. And I was a lost 18-year-old kid in a sea of 600 people in my intro chemistry class. And I share that story with my students. Also, I share it with the faculty because I think the assumption is what makes a good student is one particular thing. As Letty is saying, it's doing the right thing in class. It's doing those things, but she had to go out and find other research opportunities. I had to figure out what the heck I was doing in college. And so many of our students are in that same position. What are they doing? Why are they sitting in those classes? And I think it is our job as a collective, faculty in particular, to spark that interest, to motivate our students, to give them the content that we're so passionate about, which I don't know if I got necessarily in my first year at Berkeley at all. I think I got a lot of curriculum and content, and I don't think I got that passion for what I was doing. I ended up graduating, but I don't know if I would have considered myself a good student in that moment. That said, our students at San Francisco State they've transformed my idea of what that means. Is it a student that can critically think about the world and engage with problems that really matter? Absolutely. Our students do that at San Francisco State. Is a good student someone that continues to struggle despite everything that they're trying to do? Bob is saying less than 10% of our students don't work. The majority of our students are carrying so much in addition to their course load at San Francisco State. And those students are pushing through every day. They're doing everything they can to show up for class and get assignments done and really be engaged in the work. Is that a good student? Absolutely. Is it a student that can engage and be critically thinking about what's going on in the world? For sure. So was I a good student then? No. Am I a good student now after my time at San Francisco State? Yeah, I'm 43 years into being a student. I think I would say I'm a good student now. And I think our students at San Francisco State really exemplify those characteristics for us.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like I made reference of our preparation meeting of last week. I feel like you all were making me a much better student last week and right now. So our next question, I'll start with you, Bob. As we spoke last week, you all, said, hey, it's great to be invited to this panel, but it's not just me. There are a lot of people out there doing this work and we do it together. And so our next question is, how do we do this work collectively? And also, how do you continue to grow in your own roles on campus? So we'll start with Bob this time.
Yeah, so I think, so we have a lot of initiatives through CEETL and things like that. And I think just continuing the conversations across faculty, staff, and even other students, and giving other students an opportunity to understand what equity means, understands that they have colleagues and peers in their class that sometimes need a little bit of help, or things like that. And so so in terms of how we work together collectively in a way that increases sort of our own unique perspectives for the students and others, is I think it comes down to value and making sure that everyone feels value and demonstrating that value, not to staff, to faculty, to students. And the reason why I use the term value is because a lot of times my students, when they do, even if something is structurally something that can't be done with transfer credits or with international issues and things like that, they sometimes feel like they're not valued. And so collectively, if we can demonstrate that we value the students, that we value each other, meaning not talking negatively about, oh, well, this other division is doing this, or this other faculty member does this, right? And really saying, well, I could see why they might do that because the policy procedure is this. But let's see if we can work on something to maybe mitigate some of that and see what other solutions we can come up with. So I think just really centering how much we do care and value each other then signals to the students that they're also being cared for and valued as well. And each other as well. So
I love that. We're in it together and care for each other, not care for our students as well as each other. Grace, do you want to respond next?
Sure. Is it okay I could show some slides? I just want to say that really the work that I do only happens in community. I can't really, I work in community. I work in community. It's the best way. And I just want to do a shout out to the First Year Experience Committee, which meets second Tuesdays of every month from 10:30 to 12. Last year during the pandemic, we did work together among faculty, staff, and students to create a staff workshop on, it's called Shine, staff helping with new students. And it's actually available if there are any staff that want to take the workshop. But I really want to give a shout out to the First Year Experience Committee because it was really working in community to build that module. And you know, the pandemic has allowed so many opportunities for us to gather. I have to say, I've been working with First Year Experience faculty and peer mentors. This is another community where we're growing to really address student success and to make some interventions. Also, I'm also part of the Reach faculty learning community, which was faculty working on creating financial literacy modules for a course that they teach, as well as teaching scores. Teaching scores have been like so amazing. I mean, this teaching scores have been amazing, and this is a teaching score I was a part of. I've been part of teaching scores every semester, but they've been amazing in bringing community together and supporting all faculty to be part of this. And I think that's really key in terms of the ways to build community and to work collectively is we have to constantly decolonize the academy. And when I say decolonize the academy, we need to, as best as we can, remove elitism. And unfortunately, there is elitism, you know, I mean, there, you know, we've got the tenure track, you know, lectures. I mean, we have to constantly think about that. We have to model even in the ways that we do things to remove that elitism. And so I've appreciated the teaching scores because that's allowed lecturers and tenure track and tenured faculty to come together to talk about ways that we can improve our pedagogy and ways that we can improve student success in our teaching. And so I do feel like that's been a way here on this campus that we've been able to, you know, work together. And that's been an opportunity during the pandemic to do this on Zoom. And that's been a wonderful opportunity. So.
Thanks. I'm gonna take this opportunity actually, as you mentioned that, because I actually can't believe how much we reinforce the hierarchy in faculty at San Francisco State. I've had an opportunity to work at other places, including Chico State, and we didn't speak that way. Like we didn't speak that way at all. We spoke about faculty. And it's so ingrained in us that we're like asserting, well, at least call us lecturer faculty. I myself started as a lecturer, like, let's just say faculty. We're all faculty. So I can't pass up the opportunity since you handed it to me on a plate, Grace. So thank you for that. All right, Savi, you're up next.
Yeah, Lori Beth, fully agree with you. I'm just going to talk for a few minutes about some of the ways I think that Metro has tried to do this work across campus. You know, we've been working on systems change for the many years that Metro has been at San Francisco State, since 2007, in fact. And some of the ways that I think that we've kind of thought about collective change is through faculty learning communities. We've been doing them for many years, since the beginning of Metro, in fact, and looking at the classroom as a space where change can really happen, both for the faculty and for what's going on for students. We spend 2 years in learning communities for students, and this is a way that I think students bond with each other and also support each other to be retained and to get through their 2 years, at least with Metro, but then they're through to graduation. Our students are some of our best support for each other. And Grace was talking about the peer mentors that the First Year Experience uses. Like there's lots of ways I think on campus that we can help kind of support students helping each other around these things. I think that one of the other things that I feel like and I think this particular webinar is actually attempting to do today too, is getting staff, faculty, and students all in the same room to hear voices from everybody and to also acknowledge that really amazing ideas come from the bottom up. They come from students saying, hey, this is what we need, and then change happens and moves further up the ranks at San Francisco State. So just to acknowledge that if there are students on this webinar today, your voices matter. We've been, listening to your voices really matter, and getting what you need up and through our kind of larger collective is really important. I think that the culture of data that we've kind of moved into, I will say, is really important also. Again, collectively looking at our data, being honest about it, being open about it, seeing where we're falling down and making inroads into doing something about that. And then I'll just say the last thing real quick is that the relevant curriculum, which I know ethnic studies has been doing for many years as a college, I think all of us are learning from their legacy. And I think we're doing a lot of work around making sure curriculum really meets the needs of students and is relevant to their everyday lives. And I think that's something that faculty are working on pretty consistently throughout the years that I've been at San Francisco State.
Thanks, Savi, and thanks also for mentioning our students. Super appreciate that. And just as a reminder, we also said, how are we growing in your role on campus? So just if folks also want to speak to that. Okay, now we have Letty, and then just let me know if anyone wants to come back to this question as well.
Okay, so one of the things that Bob said was about the fact that we celebrate one another. And I remember as an undergraduate being in a Chicano studies class and saying, oh, it's the melting pot. We have to have the melting pot. And someone said to me, but Letty, don't you want the onion to stand out and the tomato and the beef and the, and I'm like, yeah, I do. So within SF Build, we definitely have our ethos, our flavor profile. And it's important for the onion to be the onion and the various pieces to be what they need to be in order for the stew to be that much richer. And actually, I would like to move away from the melting pot to the tapestry. And in fact, Rankin and Associates, when they came and did the campus climate study, they talked about the tapestry that's needed in order to change institutions. And so I think what's important is that we understand that the tapestry means that all of us have our unique contributions to the fabric, and that they all need to work together in order for us to have this beautiful woven piece of whatever it is at San Francisco State. And so all of them are important, and we contribute to one another.
Thank you. So does anyone else want to say anything else to this question? Otherwise, I'll move to our next question. Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Okay, just one thing. So how have I evolved? I've evolved to try to be the piece in the tapestry that's missing. So I look at the tapestry and I'm like, no one's saying that. No one's addressing this. And so sometimes maybe it feels like I'm messing up the tapestry. but it's like you need a chaos sometimes in order to, and there's so much chaos around, in order to drive change. And so change is necessarily messy.
Yes, I promise you are making our tapestry more beautiful. Okay, so we'll start the next one with Savi. And I know some of you talked to this a little bit already, but how do you see your experience and other staff and faculty at San Francisco's experiences reflecting the students' experience? So Savi, we'll start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Lori Beth. I think, as I mentioned earlier, my radical self got developed at San Francisco State. My approach to the world changed. My lens on things changed. My acknowledgement of the depth of racism and classism and sexism that exist in our communities, it got awakened at San Francisco State as a student. And I feel like I see, my ability to critically think about the world, I see that happening for our students. And I see so many of our faculty, having worked in Metro for as many years as I have, I've worked with lots of folks on campus. And I'm so grateful that so many of us have this approach to the world. We want students to understand. We want the sociological implications of what's going on with the pandemic. We want the health disparities to come out. We want folks to understand. And we know that our students are going to be the ones that are going to change this, that are already doing work in their communities to make an impact. So I feel like, I'm a product of San Francisco State, 2 degrees, 20 years, and I'm still here. I very much feel like you do, Lori Beth. I would not want to work anywhere else. This is the institution I want to retire from. And I think so many of us have this. We came up through San Francisco State. We are products of the education we got at San Francisco State. And I also think that so many of us are working hard to deeply understand the changes. I mean, I can say, I grew up with immigrant parents. I was the first in my family to go to college. Like, I think I identify with students, but I don't know what they're experiencing now. I haven't been in school in 20 years. I haven't been an undergraduate in many years. So we're trying to do the best that we can. And I think staff, I think you are a critical role in this, the interface that you have with students and helping us as faculty really get what's happening for students now. That's very different than the way that we were. People in my life could be community organizers and live on a community organizer salary and go to school. That is not the case anymore. And life is different and is changed. And so I think there's a way in which we all need to continue to be open and listen to what's happening and what's going on for folks. I will also say one other thing that I think that we are working towards as an institution that we could continue to do better on, and that's recruit faculty that look like our students and continue to work on that as the goal. Move lecturers that have been at San Francisco State that really are successful with their students into tenure lines. I do think that all of these things will help continue to make sure that our students are seen and serviced in the way that they need to be at State.
Agreed. Important goal. Grace?
So I've had the great fortune of being the first year experience faculty director, and we call every first year student every summer. And so I think the question, Lori Beth, you're asking is, how does my experience reflect the student experience? And I have to say, we've called students, and we called them 3 times. And our first survey that we had done, students told us why they left SF State, and that was because of financial reasons. Our survey that we just did this last summer, it was an amazing survey. We asked students what did they find, here at San Francisco State, a strength that they found here at SF State, and they said supportive faculty and staff. That's what we're doing well. And I think all the trainings that we've been doing through CEETL and just this emphasis, I do see a difference. I do think our students see us. I think that's the other thing. I think so many of us are working so hard so our students can see us. And I think they are seeing us as we're seeing them, they're seeing us. And so, there's still more work to be done. But I do feel like our work is making a difference. I really do, especially during this pandemic. I know many of you are engaging students and trying to bring community and trying to see your students. And so I believe that work is happening. I don't know if that answers the question, Lori Beth.
Oh, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Bob?
Okay. Yeah, so I think I agree with Grace. I think we've seen a lot of traction, and even in our own surveys, we felt like when we looked at our surveys in our task force, a lot of students felt like they were supported, and that their experiences of the faculty and staff were being reflected like that. So I actually agree with Grace on a lot of how this ends up in the students' experiences. And I don't really have much to add beyond that in terms of that hasn't already been said about perspective taking. I think I answered one of the questions that was up there about how perspective taking is such an important part. And I don't know, just like some of the panelists have already said, I don't know what it's like to be a student in California in 2022 now with all the things going on. And so really taking a step back and perspective taking.
Thank you. Letty, you want to wrap us up on this question?
Sure. So the way my experience has been as a Latinx scientist at State and others places is that I'm often invisible, and I'm often feel like, that you shouldn't be talking, you need to know your place. And when I talk to the students, especially the Latinx students on campus, despite being the majority, they feel invisible. They feel in their classes like they get the message, you need to know your place. And so I think that's also true for faculty and staff. And so I think that that's how I reflect the experience. And I think that understanding that still is going on is important, because ambient signaling is really, we need to have more affirming environments, and traditional environments are just threatening. That's just the way it is. And so that's how I connect with the students.
Thank you, Letty. So Grace, you mentioned the pandemic, so I think we'll start the next question with you. And I know you mentioned you've spent the last couple summers calling all of our first year students to talk with them about their experiences. So can you reflect or start us with reflecting on the impact of the pandemic on our students?
Well, I think for many of our faculty who are teaching in your classes, you probably are seeing it. I mean, every time I teach a class, I have at least 1 to 3 students who've lost a family member due to the pandemic. And so the losses are real. And so I would say that's huge. Not only the loss of a family member, but also loss of jobs, right? That's been huge. I mean, the summer that we went into the pandemic, I mean, students couldn't find a job. Or they lost their job. I had offered an internship. I had 80 students apply, and we tried to take them all with a remote internship. But this is sort of also the changing economy and families losing jobs and students losing work as well, and all the various losses. And I would say that that's been the biggest thing during this pandemic are those losses, and not to mention, I mean, at this point in time, I mean, everyone coming down with Omicron. I was in a Zoom session with students, half of the students had Omicron. So that's the state that we're in. And so the constant pivoting and transitions that we're doing. But I have to say that our students and our faculty, all of us have been doing it. And so that's the amazing thing. We've been doing it.
Thank you. Letty?
So the latest statistics on the excess burden of death due to COVID shows that it's the Latinx community that is having the greatest burden. And so while we're only 39% of the state, we're 45% of the deaths. And so if we extrapolate that to our student population, that means that the majority of our, the typical SF state student, which is Latinx, is likely to have had a greater trauma. We all know it's relative. But in terms of, but anyway, and then now with Omicron, it's affecting the 0 to 5-year-olds a lot because we just didn't get it right with the dosing. And so they're unvaccinated. Most Latinx, that's where our population is. We're the youngster, that's the greatest contribution to California's population. So I think about this a lot because I just see, I just got a text this morning from somebody who's it's happening in their family. And so I know that the burden is great across all populations, but I think, if you look at the data, it's great that the burden is most heaviest for our Latinx populations.
Thanks. And thanks for mentioning those who can't be unvaccinated. I'm starting to feel like we're forgetting those under 5. Both Savi and I have kiddos in that age group. Bob, can you, I said Savi next. Savi, if you want to talk about what you're seeing as the effects of the pandemic on our students.
Sure. I think it's very much what Grace and Letty are talking about. The impact is disproportionate, especially for our young people of color, for our first generation students, and the burden that they're all holding right now while trying to go to school and managing all of that is disproportionate, and it's intense, it's brutal. I also will just add one other thing is that the impact is really real on our faculty and students too. And I think we often, we are pushing ahead, we're doing what we can, we're like committed to our work in so many different ways. But I know faculty that have had very serious things happen as a result of COVID. They're also taking care of elders and children, and the reality of what this means for faculty and staff as well. I want to acknowledge that it's been a huge impact and a huge shift for most of us, and that the amount of work that it's taken to move from in-person to online and now into a hybrid of in-person and online, just the amount that everyone is holding around this. I think there's a deep need for like a 3-month summer vacation for every single person on this call. And the reality of what we're all having to hold and face it's just intense. Yeah.
Thank you. And also then, we plan to have more back in person, and all these faculty have planned in-person classes and now have to switch being remote for 3 weeks. I mean, it's like we can't get a break. So thank you for mentioning that. Bob, do you want to talk a little bit about the impacts of the pandemic?
Yeah, I think I think that one of the things that it's done from what I've seen is that it's made a lot of the barriers more salient to the students. So sometimes these things happen to them passively, like if they're facing roadblocks and things like that. And I think now students are becoming a little bit more observant and trying to really use their power in a way that is beneficial to them so they can make space for themselves to help their family and deal with the roles that they have. They all carry multiple roles. In my first day of class, I explained to them the multiple roles that they're carrying as work, family, and a student, and how I really can't imagine having to do all that. And so we can work together to kind of remedy some of that. And I think that students are becoming a little bit more, I guess, observant that some of those things, like they're making the distinction between this is the work that I need to get done, this is what I would consider busy work, and they're being more vocal about that. And I think that all of us should pay attention a little bit more to that, because our students are telling us things that that really are getting at the heart of how they view their relationship to higher education in San Francisco State, but higher education in general. And I think the pandemic is kind of helping move that forward, or at least a catalyst for that to be moved forward. So I think giving students a little bit more voice and agency over what they perceive to be the type of higher education experience that they want, I think is one of the outcomes of the pandemic. And I think that we should all just be mindful of that, and and not have that sort of reaction and say, well, we know better than you, we know what's good for you, things like that, and really actually listen to what the student and all faculty, staff, everyone, right? Because I think it's really highlighting some of the perhaps inefficiencies or things that we've had in place. And so students are trying to take that back while protecting their mental health and things like that. Not just students, faculty and staff as well. And so we should just be mindful of that.
I love that. I often, I'm not like one of those people who like look for the rainbows in the clouds. I'm always like, it just is what it is. But I love if we can have positive lessons and we all find our voice more in this times. That's a great thing. So do we all know, Grace, I think you have the last, no, did we all speak to this question? Was that everybody? Okay, great. Okay, then we will move to the next question, and Letty, I'll ask you to start us with this. How do we focus on equity rather than equality?
So first of all, I think it's important to define equity and equality. And so I'll do it in my own way, because that's what I do anyway. So we need equity to get to equality. And when I think of equity, I think of deferential treatment, practices, policies to redress historical inequities or just plain old inequities. Whereas equality is equal treatment, equal policies, equal practices. And so the American ideal, or the US ideal, is that we're built on equality. And that's where we want to get to. We're not even close. And so as the Presidential Council of Advisors in Science and Technology to Obama in 2012 concluded, higher education in our country was really designed for able-bodied young white men, about 18 years old, from affluent families. That's who it was designed for. And so we need to redesign using equity. And I was trying to think of a good example. And I think what came to mind is our Disability Programs Resource Center, which recognizes that our built environment was not, in our social environment, was not structured for individuals who justifiably need accommodations. And so we all in our classrooms recognize that when you get that we need to provide accommodations for our students. I think we need to get to a place where we recognize that we need to also accommodate students who have gone through our higher education system and basically been traumatized. And so that's, so getting back to the beginning, we need to be equity minded to get to equality. And the only way we can do that is to be deferential, or to provide different practices, policies, so that we can redress what's gone on in the past.
Thank you. Bob, when we were talking last week, I thought you had some really great examples from your own classroom about how you practice equity instead of equality. And maybe you can answer this question next for us.
Yeah, so I think I kind of alluded to this earlier about how, a small percentage of my students don't work and things like that. And I think one of the things that we talked about is our reliance on our policy and our procedures that's based on what we consider to be sort of the standard of student, and then using that as the basis for our understanding of what's fair. And so we'll say, well, I can't do this for you because these other students were able to do this, or I can't do this because of this, right? And so we use that as a basis, and we kind of root it in some form of fairness or equality. And it kind of doesn't really capture some of the other elements, which is that from an equity standpoint, we might say, well, these students had the resources to get this done, right? Versus these other students didn't. And one of the things that really highlighted for me is I gave some students some extra time to complete their work. And I asked the other students, the students who had everything done, well, how do you feel about this? And said, oh, well, they need it. There's a lot going on, right? I'm very lucky to have been able to complete this stuff, right? And I started to kind of really like peel back and think, even our students are aware of these types of gaps. So I just think that when we use fairness and we use like we can't and equality, we need to be mindful of what's the basis point for us to then make that discussion. This is a larger thing that if you go to CEETL, there are wonderful resources on this and things like that. So we don't necessarily need to get into all of that. But those are the type of things. Where are we giving our scholarships? Are we giving our scholarships to students who really could use it, or are we giving scholarships to students that are already shown that they're doing really well, right? Because that's still equality, right? Because we're using the same measure, we have this rubric, and everything's nice. But are we really uplifting the people who have fewer resources? And so things like that are ways for us to kind of reframe what we do.
Thank you. Safi?
Yeah, beautifully said, Letty and Bob, thank you. I think I'll just add one other kind of key point here, and that's, I think, Bob, you alluded to really challenging our own practices, both as an institution and ourselves as faculty and staff. Like, are there ways in which we are, are we providing barriers for folks to be retained and graduate that we didn't even know we were doing? Like, can we be self-reflective enough to look at those things, both at an institutional level and then for ourselves in the classroom? And I'll just add one quick thing. Metro is looking right now at a practice that English has been using for many years, which is contract grading, looking at assessment and thinking about the different ways that students are moving in terms of their labor. And I think that in a practice in particular might be something for us to look at maybe more university-wide, because it's such a way of addressing these questions of equity that Letty and Bob really eloquently described.
Thank you. Grace, you have the last word on this question, and then we have one more question.
Sure. Sorry, I want to say this is such a great question, and I have to say we should also look to our students from the 1968 student strike. They really kind of showed the way, and I think we don't have a football team here at San Francisco State, but our legacy is the 1968 student strike. And for those of you that are faculty that have never heard about the strike, I would totally encourage you to read about it. Many of our faculty are part of some teaching squares where we've been really taking a look at the strike. And our students in 1968 were radical. And I love this quote. This is from our students. We are not anti-white, we are anti-white racist oppression. And it is this powerful and just determination that is the genesis of our movement. But the growth of this movement is affirmation, an affirmation of our humanity, our strength, our beauty, our dignity, and our pride. And I just want to encourage all of us to, our students of 1968, explore the SF State Student Collection and all that it has to offer, because it is our legacy and also our roadmap of bringing equity to this campus. And in fact, this movement started the equity process in terms of outreach to various communities and creating pipelines into the university. And it's such a great model for all of us, and it's our legacy. So I just want to encourage all of you at the SF State Library. You can take a look at special collections. You can be part of teaching squares if you want to learn more about it, but it is our roadmap for equity.
Thank you. Okay, we have a little over 5 minutes left and one last question. So I think we'll start with Bob on this question. So how have you tried to respond to the barriers to retention and graduation?
So I'll shout out my department chair, Tom Thomas. A lot of times I ask for what is the foundational logic behind a policy or procedure that's in the way. And he kind of gives me the institutional knowledge and things like that and say, well, how can we change it? Or what are some of the things that we could do to get around it? And so I think just really taking a look and saying, is this policy, is this procedure, is this practice? And then finding ways of saying whether or not it upholds under these conditions, or what conditions could we change it, right, within the limits that we have. And so a little bit of positive deviance might be good for some of us to break down some of the barriers. And I will say I've had wonderful conversations with so many staff around the university helping our students. And so I also want to shout out to the many times that we've tried to find creative solutions within the policies that we have to help our students. And I think just continuing that, and then actually rewriting some of those and say, yeah, this was made back then. What do we know now about how this is creating barriers? Are we allocating our resources to students that need it, or does this policy or procedure allocate resources to students who really don't need it, but maybe by our own paradigms deserve it, whatever that means for whatever task we're allocating. So
Thank you. Dati?
I love positive deviance. That's super cool. I'm going to adopt that word. So I would say that the Neuro Leadership Journal talked about the fact that if you tell folks, don't think about the elephant in the room, you're going to think about the elephant in the room. So I've moved away from telling folks, don't microaggress, to micro-affirm. So and you can micro-affirm yourself. You can micro-affirm someone who's getting microaggressed is a bystander intervention, and you can create microaffirmations at the institutional level. And so being at the front of a classroom is a microaffirmation for the Latinx in the classroom. And when Dr. Dorotis shared the ratio, and it's 1 to 102, so we need to fix that ratio to have better equality for our students and seeing themselves represented in the cadre of folks who are successful. So what am I doing? I'm pushing for individual, interpersonal, and institutional affirmations, microaffirmations of our students.
Thank you. Grace.
Well, I have to say that, I've been teaching here for 26 years, and I know as a faculty, there's a tendency to kind of push content and knowledge, but as I continually grow as a teacher, I'm really trying to be mindful of my teaching practices and create community, constantly connect with our students, because this is what it's all about, really. It's our students, right? Getting to know them. And also to, hear from them. I mean, this last semester, and I'm going to probably bring this up at our first year experience committee, but a student had told me it costs $500 to park their car every day on campus, $500, for the semester. And that's a lot. That's about $1,000 per year. And so, I think as faculty, if we hear these things, I'm trying to, in my role, at least address them to figure out what are ways that we can do to maybe decrease parking costs for our students, because, finances are still a big issue for our students attending San Francisco State. It can be up to, $30,000 for our students to go to this campus, paying tuition and room and board. So what are ways that we can reduce costs for our students? And of course, when I'm teaching, I'm definitely going no cost with textbooks. That's definitely something that I'm constantly working on as a faculty member.
Okay, Savi.
Yeah, just to add a few other things, continue with the culture of caring. Like I think that came out in all of our responses today, is that we really do care about students, and to continue that community lens, both through students and as for each other as faculty. Like we care about one another also, and to really promote that, show that. Don't be afraid to shift things in the middle of the semester if it's not working. And to continue to follow our students. I know many of us do that informally as faculty because our students seek us out, but to continue to follow students as long as they're at San Francisco State, make the phone calls, make the personal connection, respond to the text message or the email that comes from a student that's reaching out, and reach out, just do the work in the beginning to reach out for students. Make sure that they know there's someone on campus that's looking out for them. And if all of us are doing it, there's lots of us looking out for those students at any point.
Thanks so much to all of you. I really appreciate all of your input and participation. And I'm going to hand it back now to Teddy.
I just really want to thank all of our panelists today for your labor, for the themes that you mentioned, for the honesty of your perspective, and to borrow a phrase from Letty, the richness of the tapestries that you've woven for us today. Honestly, this is why I wanted to come to San Francisco State as a student, and why I'm honored to continue to contribute to the community today in all of the various ways that I do. There's a lot of inspiration to take away, and I know that I'll be thinking about this discussion for a while, imagining how I can grow and shift in being a better teacher, staff member, student, and organizer. But to give us all a little bit of a reflection time, why don't we take a short 10-minute break, and we'll come back at 10:30 and hear from Provost Jennifer Summitt. So see you back here in 10 minutes. All right, welcome back, everybody. Before we invite our next speaker, let me take a moment to highlight another opportunity to engage around the topics of resilient and student success, but from a different vantage point. Starting in the fall of 2021, President Mahoney initiated an inclusive and community-driven strategic planning process. The President's Office, organizers from Blue Beyond, and members of the Strategic Planning Committee will be hosting a series of workshops, focus groups, and planning surveys to allow all members of the campus community, faculty, staff, students, administrators, and community members to share their perspectives. I'm going to drop the link in the chat. But it's also planning.sfsu.edu/opportunities-involvement. And you can check that out for specific dates, times, and RSVP information. I'll also place it in the Q&A. While university planning is certainly a major element of both resilience and student success, the core mission of developing and fostering academic excellence is crucial. So please join me now in welcoming Provost Jennifer Summitt for her reflections on our retreat's theme. Provost?
Thank you so much, Chair Albenack. I also want to thank the organizers of this retreat, which is off to a wonderful start with this morning's panel. I'm deeply grateful to each of the participants for sharing their work and their insights on student success and educational equity. In the spirit of today's theme, I want to take this opportunity to pay tribute to the late Bell Hooks, who died in December. Not only did she teach at San Francisco State, her writings challenge us to reflect deeply on what student success means within a framework of racial justice. Her vision of education for equity speaks to the driving purpose of the CSU's Education Equity Initiative and the crucial work that brings us together today and every day. The Atlantic magazine called Bell Hooks one of our nation's leading public intellectuals. The Utne Reader called her one of 100 visionaries who could change your life. We can be proud that she launched her career here teaching in our own Women and Gender Studies department in the 80s. I had the honor of meeting her in 2017 when she returned to campus to address a capacity student audience in Jack Adams Hall. She spoke like she wrote, as an educator, but also a critic of education. Hooks' vision is fiercely hopeful. In the title of one of her books, she calls education a practice of freedom, driven by what she calls in another, a pedagogy of hope. But hope isn't the same thing as optimism, as Václav Havel reminds us. It's a conscious choice to imagine how things might be, not a denial of the way things are. Hooks knew that her vision called for a revolution of values, as she put it, borrowing a phrase from Martin Luther King Jr. And she deliberately set out that vision against higher education's historic function to create not equity, but hierarchy, not to lift up, but to weed out. She shared this critique of higher education in common with Lanny Guinier, another brilliant Black intellectual whom we lost just this month. As Guinier argues in her book, The Tyranny of Meritocracy, Americans have long seen higher education as a proxy marker of class, which draws value from its status as a limited and not a public good. Paradoxically, more than a half century of expanded access has done little to change this view. As education scholar David Laborie has shown, the more Americans went to college, the more stratified campuses became, allowing higher education to increase opportunity even while continuing to reproduce privilege. The most selective campuses came to occupy the highest rungs in a ladder of prestige. The more applicants they turned away, the higher quality they claimed. The false identification of selection with quality permeated even allegedly egalitarian campuses. Only instead of turning students away at admissions, they did so after students enrolled, by quietly but systematically discouraging many of them, particularly BIPOC students, from staying. Hooks, who taught at private as well as public campuses, laments the fact that repressive education practices are more acceptable at state institutions, woven into the fabric of a differentiated system. That's a quotation mark. When what Guinier calls the tyranny of meritocracy holds that merit can only belong to the select few students who prove their worth in a competitive system. While students at selective campuses do so by getting in, at less selective campuses, they do so by staying in and successfully negotiating mechanisms historically designed to weed them out. Non-selective campuses essentially moved the selection process from the admissions office into the institution itself by enlisting faculty as internal gatekeepers. In so doing, they established high-stakes testing and grading practices designed to move students up or out. The very convention of assigning letter grades to students is a relatively recent phenomenon, introduced by colleges in the 20th century as part of what Kathy Davidson calls the industrialization of higher education. As she notes, the practice of grading would later be borrowed from colleges by the American Meatpackers Association. But according to Davidson, the meatpackers worried that it was difficult to reduce something as complex as the quality of sirloin or chuck to an A, B, C, D, or F. Strangely, as Davidson Riley remarks, educators were less skeptical about applying grades to student learning. Educational research shows that grading can play an important role in helping students learn when it's aligned with transparent learning goals and assessment standards. But the research also challenges grading conventions and received wisdom that don't support student learning, such as the idea that courses with lower average student grades reflect high academic standards rather than problems with course design and delivery. Or the idea that raising average grades can only happen by lowering standards rather than improving student engagement and learning. It's difficult to see past dominant models of teaching and grading, and even more so to envision alternatives. This is where efforts like today's retreat play such an important role by inviting us to reflect critically on our own practices and to learn from members of our own community who are finding success with new models of teaching and learning. These include colleagues advancing student success like those we heard from in this morning's panel, and those we'll hear from next on their use of high impact practices like community engagement, collaborative, and student-led learning. They also include departments that are working in line with the Chancellor's Equity Initiative to reduce high failure rates by identifying new ways to engage and advance student learning. I'll cite just one example from our own economics department. On many campuses, introductory economics is a classic weed out class, notorious for its high failure rates. Our econ department determined to take on the problem by rethinking how the class is taught. In a collective effort, the faculty teaching the course's multiple sections convened as a group to analyze grading practices, reflect on their expectations for student learning, and compare how learning was assessed. To create consistency in assignments and assessment practices, they developed a common course outline structured around student learning outcomes. They also created an ongoing faculty learning community to build on their findings and share best practices. And in just 2 semesters, They've already seen encouraging results, reducing failure rates by 5 percentage points, which translates to hundreds of students who are now making progress in their degrees rather than repeating the class or choosing to leave the university, as students who fail classes too often do, especially our BIPOC students. The work that economics is doing bears out what Grace, you said this morning. Our students are enough. All students are worthy and capable of learning, and education is more than a process of sorting, selecting, and weeding. It's a conscious process of growth that takes all of us working together to achieve. In supporting their students, economics faculty found themselves supporting one another, coming together to align their expectations and build on their practices, established a new level of faculty community as the classroom shifted from a private space of closed performance to a collective place of learning and growth. As Bob Bonner put it this morning, when we care for our students, we also care for one another. The last 2 years have been unthinkably challenging, but we can be proud of how we've met those challenges, particularly in supporting student learning and success. At the close of last semester, San Francisco State surveyed our students about their experiences with online teaching and learning, and they reported overwhelming appreciation for the efforts faculty have made to maintain high-quality instruction despite the challenges of the pandemic, while also showing students flexibility and compassion, lessons that will continue to benefit our students long after the pandemic. I want to close by expressing my profound appreciation for the extraordinary work this reflects for the faculty and staff who have worked so hard to support our students and their learning in these difficult times. Finally, I want to give the last word to Bell Hooks when she wrote this. All of us in the academic world and the culture as a whole are called to renew our minds if we are to transform educational institutions and society so that the way we live, teach, and work can reflect our joy in cultural diversity, our passion for justice, and our love of freedom. The work we do today draws us closer to her vision. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today, and thank you most of all for being here and sharing in this important work.
Thank you, Provost Summitt, for those important comments and historical and cultural reference around student success. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Jackson Wilson. I'm a faculty member in the Department of Recreation, Parks, and Tourism and Vice Chair of the Academic Senate. I'm going to talk about two things right now: service and high impact practice panels. So service. During the amazing previous panel, many of the panelists, such as Grace Yu, directly or indirectly referred to the service they do to support student success. This occurs at many levels at SF State, from the Academic Senate to Department Success Committees. On that note, Bob Bonner talked about rewriting policy to change it if it gets in the way of student success. So it would be amiss of me not to, as the Vice Chair of the Academic Senate, not to invite you to come and join and be part of the Academic Senate to rewrite and have that impact on policy to further support student success. So given the multiple ways that we support student success through service, I think a few of us realize the complete breadth and depth of the different ways members of campus are involved in service and how that service supports student success. Therefore, we're collecting statements from existing service committees about how your service supports student success, and ultimately to increase awareness of that important work and those connections. So you can find find the right screen to share. And here we go. So we have in session 3 here, you can find out more about these statements about how service committees support student success. And so here's the request here. These statements will be communicated in different ways, including being posted on the page of the Senate website, will be publicized by our university retreat in March, and will be communicated to groups working on university planning. And if you go to the examples there are a few examples that are currently out there. Now, originally we thought about having these statements due today, but rather than encouraging everyone to work, if you're faculty over break or students, they're due 1 month from now, which is February 19th. And so look forward to all of those. Moreover, the afternoon today is reserved for service work, for committees to work on these statements, as well as other important service work. So thank you for your service and contributions to shared governance. Second, high impact practices. So we're going to be transitioning to our high impact practices panel that's going to occur from now until noon. And if you go to the iLearn site, you'll see that there's the HIP, the discussion group descriptions and Zoom link. And if you click on that, you'll see a number of different options here. I just want to point out, it says on the top page 1 and 2, or you can hit all. You can hit all, and then you can see all of them. And I don't know about you, but when I look through here, I see so many amazing opportunities. I'm like, oh, I want to go to that. And that looks really good. And that looks amazing. So if you're like me and you want to go to them all, please know that they're all being recorded. And so you can go back and view them later if that's of interest to you. There's going to continue to be someone here on this link if you need any support. Otherwise, thank you for your work supporting student success. And please enjoy the high impact practice panels. Thank you.